Get on your knees, the man in the black coat snarled, pressing the barrel of his gun against the back of Dante Moretti's skull in the middle of a Brooklyn street at 6 in the morning. The Moretti empire ends today. He pulled the trigger and Dante moved. The bullet tore through his shoulder instead of his head. He hit the ground hard, bleeding, and his men scattered like startled birds. The shooter walked toward him, slowly reloading, smiling. Nobody was going to save the most feared man in New York. Nobody except a woman in a green apron standing 20 feet away, holding a bucket of roses, who had absolutely no business being alive after what she was about to do. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Lena Kowalska had been awake since 4:30 in the morning, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the feeling she'd had since the moment she opened her eyes, a low, nameless pressure sitting behind her sternum, the kind that had no explanation and no cure except to keep moving. She had learned to trust that feeling over the years. It had kept her sane through nursing school, through her mother's illness, through the slow unraveling of a marriage that had never quite fit either of them. So she got up, made her coffee too strong the way she always did, wrapped herself in the oversized flannel she kept hanging by the back door of her apartment, and walked the 11 steps down to the flower shop below. Kowalska's Blooms had been her grandmother's first, then her mother's, and now hers. It sat on the corner of a narrow street in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn, squeezed between a dry cleaner and a deli that had been run by the same Greek family for 40 years. The sign above the door was hand-painted and slightly crooked, and Lena had refused every suggestion to replace it. The shop smelled like wet stems and cool earth, and just a little bit of the lavender oil she kept burning near the register. It was the one place in the world where she felt completely and entirely like herself. She was arranging a delivery order, 24 white peonies for a woman named Carol, who ordered flowers every Friday for reasons she had never explained and Lena had never asked when she heard the first sound. Not a car backfiring. She had grown up in Brooklyn. She knew exactly what a gunshot sounded like. She went still. Then came the second one, closer, followed by shouting in the street, not the ordinary argument kind of shouting, but the raw animal kind, the kind that meant something had gone very wrong, very fast. Lena set down the peonies and moved toward the front window without fully deciding to. Through the glass, she could see a black SUV at an angle across the street, one door hanging open, and 3 men moving in ways that didn't look like anything good. One of them was down on one knee on the pavement. Another was pulling a phone from his jacket. The third, a large man in a dark suit, was dragging something or someone toward the curb. Lena's nursing instincts fired before her common sense could stop them. She was out the front door with her hands still holding the edge of the door frame when she registered what she was actually looking at. The man being half carried, half dragged across the street was tall, dark-haired, well-dressed, in the kind of way that meant money rather than taste, and he was bleeding heavily from his right shoulder. His face was gray. His jaw was clenched so hard she could see the muscle jumping in his cheek from 15 feet away. He was conscious, but not by much. "He needs pressure on that wound," Lena said, and her voice came out steady, which surprised her. The 2 men who were upright turned and looked at her. One of them reached inside his jacket immediately. The other held up a hand to stop him. "Who are you?" the second man said. He was shorter than the first, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that had seen things she didn't want to imagine. "I'm the woman whose shop you just stumbled in front of," Lena said, "and I'm a nurse. If that bullet hit the subclavian artery, he has maybe 4 minutes before it stops mattering where you take him. So you can point that gun at me or you can let me help, your choice." The man with the gray hair looked at her for one long second. Then he looked at the man bleeding on the pavement. "Marco," he said quietly, "put it away." Marco did not look happy about it, but he put it away. Lena moved forward and crouched beside the injured man. Up close, he was younger than she'd thought, mid-40s maybe, with a face that would have been handsome under different circumstances, and a quality of stillness about him. Even now, that felt like something trained rather than something natural. His eyes found hers immediately, and they were dark, very dark, and sharply focused in a way that told her his mind was still working, even if his body was failing. "I'm going to check the wound," she said to him directly. "Don't move." "I don't take orders," he said. His voice was low and rough and Italian accented, not strongly but enough. Then don't think of it as an order, she said, already pressing her fingers carefully against the fabric of his jacket near his shoulder. Think of it as the only option you have. He didn't answer, but he didn't move either. The entry wound was high on the right shoulder, which was either very lucky or very unlucky, depending on exactly where the bullet had traveled. She couldn't tell without getting him inside and getting the jacket off. The bleeding was serious, but not instantly catastrophic, which meant the artery was likely intact. For now. I need to get him inside, she said, standing. I have a back room. It's clean. I have a basic medical kit. I keep supplies because I do home visits sometimes for elderly patients in the neighborhood. She looked at the man with the gray hair. What I don't have is a surgical theater, so if the bullet has done serious internal damage, none of this is going to matter, and you're going to need a hospital regardless. No hospitals, the gray-haired man said. I figured, Lena said. She looked back down at the man on the ground. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something between assessment and something else, something she didn't have a word for yet. Can you stand? She asked him. Yes, he said. It took him 3 attempts and the assistance of 2 of his men, but he stood. They got him through the front door of the shop, past the buckets of peonies and the refrigerated case of roses and the hand-lettered chalkboard sign that said Tuesday Special Tulips, 3 bunches for $10, and into the back room where Lena did her bookkeeping and kept her supply deliveries. She cleared the work table with one white arm, sweeping invoice folders onto the floor without ceremony, and helped ease him down onto it. I need his jacket off, she said, and his shirt. The gray-haired man, she would later learn his name was Sal, moved to help without being asked. The injured man said nothing, though she could see from the set of his face that taking the jacket off cost him considerably. When she got a clear look at the wound, she let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The bullet had entered cleanly, and based on the exit wound she found when she checked his back, it had passed straight through without fragmenting. The damage was real and the bleeding needed controlling, but there was nothing lodged inside him, which changed the picture significantly. You're luckier than you deserve to be, she said, reaching for her kit. People keep telling me that, he said. Do they? She said. It was not quite a question. Dante Moretti, she said from the doorway, watching her work. You may have heard the name. Lena pressed a folded pad of gauze firmly against the exit wound and held it there, applying steady pressure. She did not look up. I've heard it, she said. She had. Everyone in Brooklyn with any awareness of how certain things worked had heard of Dante Moretti. She had heard the name the way you hear about a storm system moving up the coast abstractly as something that existed in the world but not in yours. She had heard it from old Mr. Caruso at the deli next door, who spoke of the Moretti family with a complicated mixture of fear and something almost like civic pride. She had heard it from one of her elderly home visit patients, a retired longshoreman named Pete, who had told her once while she was checking his blood pressure that the only reason the neighborhood still had a neighborhood was because certain people kept other certain people from doing worse. She had never imagined meeting the name in her back room. Then you know, Sal said. I know enough to know that knowing too much is dangerous, she said. Hand me that roll of tape. The white one, brown. And if any of your other men are going to come through that door, please have them knock first, because I am trying to concentrate. There was a brief silence. Then Sal almost smiled. She could hear it in his voice when he handed her the tape and said, Understood. Dante Moretti watched her work with those dark eyes and said nothing for a while. She could feel the quality of his attention. It wasn't the unfocused drift of someone going into shock, which was what she was watching for. It was deliberate. He was cataloging her the same way she suspected that he cataloged everything. You're not afraid, he said finally. It came out somewhere between an observation and a question. I'm terrified, she said, winding the tape firmly. But fear is a feeling, not a decision. You can be afraid and still do the thing. He was quiet for a moment. Where did you learn that? Nursing school mostly, and my grandmother. She was a nurse. She was a florist, Lena said, but she survived the war, the first one she could remember anyway. She said the same thing applied to every hard thing she'd ever faced. She tied off the bandage and sat back slightly, examining her work with a critical eye. It would hold. It wasn't elegant, but it would hold, and that was all she needed it to do for now. You need fluids and you need rest, she said, looking at him directly. You've lost blood. Not enough to be immediately life-threatening, but enough that your body is going to start making poor decisions soon. Is there anyone I can call? A doctor? Someone you trust? Doc Reyes, Sal said from the doorway. I'll reach him. Good. Until he gets here, he doesn't move, she said in Sal's direction, then back to Dante. And I mean that. I don't care who you are or what you're used to. In this room right now, you are a patient. And patients do what I tell them. Dante Moretti looked at her for a long moment with an expression that no one who knew him well would have recognized, because it was not an expression he had worn in a very long time. All right, he said quietly. She was halfway to the small sink in the corner, washing her hands, when the front door of the shop burst open. She heard it rather than saw it, the crash of the bell above the door, the sound of boots on hardwood floor. Not the cautious sound of people entering carefully, but the hard sound of people who had decided they didn't need to be careful. Sal moved from the doorway instantly. There was shouting from the front of the shop, harsh, short, the kind of verbal confrontation that existed only as a thin prelude to something worse. Lena turned back toward the work table. Dante was already trying to sit up. Don't, she said. Those aren't my men, he said flatly. I know, stay down. That's not how this works. You have a through-and-through gunshot wound and no blood pressure to speak of, she said, and her voice had gone very quiet in the way that quiet can be more alarming than loud. If you stand up and start moving around, you will pass out on my floor, and then you will be completely useless to everyone, including yourself. So stay down. He stayed down. She could see the effort it cost him in every line of his face. From the front of the shop came the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then Sal's voice, lower now, the kind of tone that was past anger and into something colder. And then a voice she didn't recognize, high and sharp, and carrying an accent she couldn't immediately place. We know he's here, old man. Tell us where, or we start with the flowers. Lena moved to the door of the back room and cracked it open an inch. There were 3 of them in the front of the shop. 2 were holding weapons that they weren't pointing at anything in particular, yet which told her they were here for information first and violence second. They wanted to confirm Dante was here before they committed to anything they couldn't take back. The third, the one who had spoken, was walking slowly along the refrigerated case, running one finger along the glass, looking at the roses with an expression of mild contempt. Sal was standing very still near the register, and she understood from his stillness that he was calculating something, measuring something, and the only reason he hadn't already acted was that he was outnumbered and he was waiting for the equation to change. Lena pushed the door fully open and stepped into the front of the shop. All 3 men looked at her. Can I help you? She said. The one near the refrigerated case turned to look at her with the particular kind of surprise men like him reserve for women who behaved unexpectedly. Who are you? Amita. I own this shop, she said, and you've been in here about 45 seconds, which means if any of my neighbors have already called the police, they'll be here in under 4 minutes. I know because I've timed it. I live here, so whatever it is you're looking for, I'd suggest you tell me quickly and then leave. The man stared at her. Where is he? Where is who? She said. I've had delivery drivers, a man from the gas company, and a woman returning a potted fern this morning. You're going to have to be more specific. Moretti. Lena let a beat of silence pass in a way that she had learned over years of dealing with difficult patients and angrier family members, communicated something very particular. Not guilt, not panic, just the natural pause of someone genuinely processing a strange question. I don't know anyone named Moretti, she said, and I need you to take your hand off my flower case. Those orchids are imported, and they're not cheap. Something shifted in the room. She felt it before she understood it, the quality of attention from all 3 men changing and sharpening. The one near the register moved his hand inside his jacket, and then Dante Moretti walked through the door from the back room. He should not have been standing. She knew the moment she saw him that walking from the table to the door had taken more out of him than he was going to admit, because his face had gone the color of old concrete, and his right hand was braced against the doorframe in a way that looked casual but wasn't. But he was standing, and the quality of his presence in the room was something that she felt physically, a shift in gravity, almost the way a room changes when a storm comes in through an open window. The 3 men went very still. Renetti, Dante said, and his voice had recovered something of its authority even if his body hadn't. He was looking at the man near the refrigerated case. You drove all the way from Queens for this. You were supposed to be dead by now. The the man Renetti said. And there was something underneath the bravado that Lena recognized immediately from years of watching people in frightening situations. He was afraid. He was covering it, but he was afraid. I've been supposed to be dead a lot of times, Dante said. I'm still having breakfast. That should tell you something. There are 3 of us and 1 of you, Renetti said. There are 3 of you, Dante said, and 1 of me and 1 of her and 4 of my men outside who are currently deciding how patient to be. He let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. Leave, don't come back. And tell whoever sent you that the message has been received and the response will follow in due course. Renetti's jaw moved. He was doing the math, Lena could see it, and the math wasn't working out the way he'd planned it. He looked at her, then back at Dante. This isn't over. Nothing ever is, Dante said. That's the nature of things. But this specific conversation is. Renetti held for 1 more breath. Then he turned toward the door. His 2 men fell in behind him, and the bell above the door jangled again as they left and the shop went quiet. Lena looked at Dante Moretti, who was still braced against the door frame, and who she was fairly certain was approximately 20 seconds from collapsing. Back room, she said, now, before you fall. I'm not going to fall. You are absolutely going to fall, she said, already moving toward him. The adrenaline is the only thing holding you up, and it's almost out. So please stop arguing with me and walk. He looked at her, that expression again, the one she couldn't name. Then quietly, all right. She got him back to the work table, and he sat down with the careful, controlled movement of someone managing pain by sheer force of will, and she checked the bandage and found it had held, which was something, and she stood in the small back room of her flower shop with her hands slightly unsteady for the first time since the morning began, and understood with complete clarity that whatever her life had been at 5 o'clock this morning, it was something different now. They'll come back, she said. Not a question. Yes, Dante said, with more people. Probably. She sat down on the edge of the stool across from him. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands. Then she looked up at him. Why did you come here, she asked. Not to the street, to this block. There are 100 places you could have gone. Something moved in his face. Not quite discomfort. She didn't think he did discomfort in the usual way, but something adjacent to it. Something honest. My mother used to buy flowers from this shop, he said. When I was small, every Sunday, she would walk from 3 blocks over, and she would spend more than she should have on whatever was brightest that week, and she would carry them home wrapped in newspaper. He paused. I don't know why I came here. I wasn't thinking clearly. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Then you're staying until Doc Reyes gets here and says you can move without killing yourself. After that, we'll figure out the rest. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. That's what makes it a choice. He was quiet again. Outside, through the thin walls of the shop, she could hear the neighborhood waking up the Greek family at the deli, opening their gate, a delivery truck somewhere on the next block, pigeons on the window ledge above the refrigerated case. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the kind she had heard every morning for 11 years. None of it felt ordinary anymore. And somewhere at the back of her mind, the part of her that had always known how to survive things was already running. Numbers, already calculating what came next. Already understanding that the decision she had made at 6:15 in the morning to walk towards something frightening instead of away from it was not a decision she was going to be able to take back. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Dante Moretti was watching her with those dark eyes, and she thought that he was probably very rarely in a position where someone he didn't know was making decisions for him in. She thought he was probably very rarely in a position where someone said no to him, or stay, or you are my patient now, and patients do what I tell them. She thought, looking at him, that whatever was underneath all the power and the fear he generated in other people, it was something she had not expected to see. Something that looked from this distance an awful lot like a man who was very tired. Rest, she said, while you can. He leaned back against the wall, and for once he didn't argue. And in the front of the shop, 3 dozen white peonies for a woman named Carol sat in their bucket waiting. Doc Reyes arrived 40 minutes later, which was 39 minutes longer than Lena would have preferred. He was a compact man in his early 60s with the hands of someone who had spent a lifetime doing careful work under difficult conditions, and he came through the back door of the shop with a bag that looked ordinary enough from the outside, but contained things that told a different story. He did not introduce himself. He looked at Dante, looked at Lena's bandaging, and said with the tone of a man who had seen worse, but not by much good work. Then he went to work himself, and Lena stood back and let him, because she was practical enough to know when her part was done and someone else's was beginning. Sal stood in the corner the whole time, arms crossed, watching the door. Marco, the one who had reached for his jacket earlier, had positioned himself at the front of the shop. She could see him through the cracked door, moving between the window and the register, methodical and quiet. She had the distinct impression he was the kind of person who was most dangerous precisely when he was being most quiet. "You held the pressure in the right place," Doc Richter said to her without looking up. "If you'd been 2 centimeters lower, you'd have done more harm than good." "I know," she said. He did look up then briefly. "ER. Surgical floor, then home visits. 8 years total." He nodded, returned to his work. "He'll need antibiotics and real rest. Not the kind he thinks counts as rest, but actual horizontal stillness for at least 48 hours. He glanced at Dante, who was watching the ceiling with the expression of someone enduring something. "Which he won't do." "I heard that," Dante said. "I know you did," Doc Reyes said pleasantly. Lena pulled her stool closer and sat down. She was calculating. She had 2 delivery orders due before noon, a standing arrangement for a restaurant on Smith Street that she'd been doing every Wednesday for 6 years, and a home visit to Mr. Petrakis on the 3rd floor of a building 4 blocks over, who had congestive heart failure and who got anxious if she was late. None of that had stopped existing simply because a Mafia boss had bled on her work table. The world she had found was consistently indifferent to dramatic timing. "I need to make some calls," she said to Sal. "Personal, my regular clients." Sal looked at her steadily. "What will you tell them?" "That I'm running behind," she said. "Nothing else. I'm not going to tell anyone anything. I understand what kind of situation this is." "Do you?" he said, not unkindly, but not easily either. "I've been treating people who didn't want to be found for 6 years," she said. "Home visit nursing in Brooklyn is not as different from this as you might think." Sal said nothing to that. But he didn't stop her when she took out her phone. She stepped into the narrow hallway between the back room and the small bathroom and called her delivery driver, a 22-year-old named Tomas, who was reliable in the way that young people are reliable when they actually care about something, and told him to handle the noon orders on his own and use the float cash in the register drawer. Then she called the restaurant on Smith Street and pushed the Wednesday arrangement to Thursday. Then she called Mr. Petrakis, who answered on the second ring and said, "Lena, you're late," before she could speak. "I know, Mr. Petrakis, I'm sorry. I'll be there by 2. My ankles are swollen." "I know. Elevate them on 2 pillows and don't eat anything salty before I get there." "I had pretzels for breakfast." She closed her eyes briefly. "Of course you did. I'll bring the blood pressure cuff. 2 pillows, Mr. Petrakis." She hung up and stood in the hallway for a moment, with her phone pressed against her chest and her eyes on the water stain on the ceiling that had been there since the pipes froze in January, and that she had been meaning to have fixed for 3 months. She could hear Dante's voice through the door, low, controlled back to something that sounded more like authority, talking to Sal in a tone that she recognized as the tone people use when they are pretending to be stronger than they are. She pushed the door open. Doc Reyes was packing in his bag. Dante was sitting upright, which was more than she would have recommended, and was speaking quietly to Sal. They both stopped when she came in, which told her something about what they had been discussing. "Whatever you're planning," she said, "he's not moving for at least 12 hours. I don't care what you decide after that. But 12 hours. "There are things I have to," Dante started. "There are things your body has to do first," she said. "It has to replace blood volume and regulate your blood pressure, and begin the basic repair process that prevents that wound from becoming infected and then septic. Those things take precedence over whatever you think is more important." "Renetti will regroup," Dante said. Not arguing exactly, explaining. "I understand that," she said, "and when he does, you'll be better equipped to deal with it if you haven't passed out from blood loss. Is that a fair analysis?" He looked at her. Something crossed his face. She was getting better at reading him already, which was both useful and unsettling. It was something like concession wrapped in something that was not quite amusement, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Fair," he said. Doc Reyes paused at the door of the back room. "I'll come back this evening. If the fever spikes above 102, call me, not an ambulance. He looked at Lena. You have my number. Sal will give it to me, she said. Doc Reyes nodded, said something brief and quiet to Sal in Italian that she didn't follow and left. The back room was quieter without him. Lena set about tidying, not from nervousness, though she was nervous, but because occupied hands helped her think. She gathered the used gauze, the tape wrappers, the small packet from the saline flush Doc Reyes had used, and folded everything into a plastic bag. She wiped down the work table around where Dante sat. She was aware of him watching her the entire time and did not remark on it. You live above the shop, he said finally. Yes. Alone. She stopped and looked at him directly. That's an interesting question to ask someone you've known for less than 2 hours. I'm asking because it affects the safety calculation, he said without any particular defensiveness. Not for any other reason. Yes, she said after a moment. Alone. He nodded. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read at all. We'll post someone outside. You'll post someone inside, Sal corrected quietly from the doorway, and Dante looked at him and then back at Lena. Sal is usually right about these things, he said. Is that acceptable? She considered it. The truth was that the thought of having one of Dante Moretti's men standing in her shop indefinitely was several different kinds of uncomfortable. But the thought of what had happened with Renetti happening again without anyone between it and her was its own kind of uncomfortable, and she was a practical woman. Marco can stay, she said. He seems like someone who knows how to be quiet when it matters. Sal blinked. It was the closest thing to surprise she had seen from him. You read people quickly. Occupational habit, she said in return to her tidying. The morning stretched. Dante did not sleep. She suspected sleep was something he treated as an inconvenience on the best of days. But he did remain still, which was the medical requirement she actually cared about. He took the antibiotics Doc Reyes had left without arguing. He drank the water she brought him without being asked twice. She was discovering a man who resisted things on principle but ultimately operated from a core of pragmatism. When something was clearly necessary, he did it. He simply preferred to establish first that he had chosen to do it rather than been told to. She understood that quality. She had it herself in a different form. Around 11, Tomas came back from the delivery run and knocked on the back door, which was the door she told him to use. He was a skinny kid with paint-stained sneakers and the kind of face that had not yet learned to be anything other than transparent. And when Lena opened the door, he looked past her at the large man sitting on the work table and at Marco, who was visible in the doorway to the front room, and then back at Lena with his eyebrows somewhere near his hairline. Delivery's done, he said, working to keep his voice casual and not entirely succeeding. Thank you, Tomas. Take the rest of the day. You sure? Because I'm sure. Go. He went very quickly without looking back at the work table. He'll talk, Marco said from the doorway. He'll talk to his girlfriend about something weird at work, Lena said. He doesn't know anyone's name. He didn't see anything specific, and he's 22 years old. He's not a threat. Marco looked at Dante. Dante said nothing, which Lena was beginning to understand was his version of agreement when he didn't want to say the words. It was shortly after noon when everything changed again. Sal had stepped outside to make calls. He'd been doing it in rotation 10 minutes out back, in 10 minutes out, and Marco was in the front room, and Lena had brought a chair into the back room and was reviewing a supply order on her laptop because the mundane work of the world did not stop, regardless of the drama occurring within it, when Dante said her name for the first time. Lena. She looked up. He was looking at his hands, which were resting on his knees, his left hand loose, his right hand slightly careful around the shoulder. I want to explain something to you. You don't owe me an explanation, she said. No, he agreed, but I'm going to give you one anyway. He looked up. What happened this morning, Renetti, the shooting, it's part of something that's been building for several months. There's a piece of business involving the port contracts. 3 families have been negotiating for the same stake, and someone decided that instead of continuing to negotiate, they would rather reduce the number of people at the table. She set her laptop aside. And you're one of those people. I'm the one they most want removed, he said, because I have the longest relationship with the Port Authority and the strongest case. If I'm gone, the other 2 split it. So this isn't random. Nothing in my world is random, he said. That's both the advantage and the problem with it. He paused. The problem for you is that being seen with me helping me puts a mark next to your name. Renetti's people saw your face. They know this location. The directness of it sat in the room. She looked at him steadily. You're telling me that helping you has made me a target, she said. Yes. And when were you planning to tell me this? Now, he said, because you should have made the choice knowing that, and you didn't, and that's, he stopped. He seemed to consider how to finish the sentence carefully. That's not how I operate. I don't use people without their knowledge. She realized the most genuinely uncomfortable she had seen him. Not the physical discomfort of the wound which he managed with the practice of someone who had dealt with pain before. This was something else. This was the discomfort of a man who had a code and who was facing the fact that events had bent it without his control. I made the choice I made because someone was bleeding in the street, she said. I would have made the same choice without any of the information. That's not naivety. That's just how I'm built. I know, he said. That's why I'm telling you now. She stood up and went to check the bandage, not because it needed checking, but because she needed something to do with her hands. She examined the edges of the tape, the color of the gauze beneath the temperature of his skin near the wound. What does having a mark next to my name mean practically, she said. What does that look like? It means, he said very carefully, that they may try to use you, to get to me. Her hand stilled. And what are you proposing to do about that, she said. I'm proposing, he said, to make sure that doesn't happen. That's not an answer. That's a result. How? He looked at her with something approaching respect. You asked the right questions. I asked the questions that need asking, she said. I've been doing it my whole career. People always want to tell you the headline. You have to push for the method. He almost smiled. It was the first time she had seen anything close to a smile on his face, and it changed it considerably. Not into something soft exactly, but into something with more depth to it, more dimension, like a portrait when the light angle shifts. My proposal, he said, is that for the time being you are not alone, that the people I have placed here are not here purely for my benefit, and that when I am in a position to resolve this situation, which will happen and which will happen quickly, I resolve it in a way that removes you from the equation permanently. How long, she said. A week, he said. Possibly less. And in the meantime, I just run my shop with a bodyguard and pretend this is normal. You're more capable of that than you think, he said. You've already proven it this morning. She sat back down. She was thinking about Mr. Petrakis and his swollen ankles and his pretzel breakfast, and she was thinking about Carol and the peonies that had never made it into a delivery box, and she was thinking about the sign above the door that was slightly crooked and that she had never let anyone replace. One condition, she said. He waited. If I'm going to have Marco in my shop for a week, he learns the difference between the alstroemeria and the lilies. I won't have someone standing in front of my refrigerated case who can't identify what's in it. It looks unprofessional. Dante stared at her. I'm serious, she said. I know you are, he said. That's what makes it extraordinary. She went to get him more water because he needed fluids and because she needed 30 seconds to breathe, and she stood at the small sink and let the tap run cold over her wrists for a moment the way she did when she needed to reset herself, and she stared at the rusted faucet handle, and she said quietly to no one, You have lost your mind, Lena Kowalska. And then she turned off the tap and went back in. It was mid-afternoon, the light changing in the way it did in late winter, when the sky started making its apologies when Sal came back in from outside with a different quality to his movement, faster, more compressed, and said to Dante without preamble, Colucci is calling it a meeting tomorrow night. The temperature in the room dropped. Dante was absolutely still. Colucci. He says he's mediating. He wants all three families present. Colucci doesn't mediate, Dante said. Colucci picks a side and builds a theater around it so no one can see which side he's on until it's too late. Lena looked between them. Who is Colucci? Both men looked at her, then at each other with the brief visual negotiation of people deciding how much to say. He's the reason this is more complicated than a simple territory dispute, Dante said. He is the third variable. And if he's called a meeting, that means the situation has moved faster than I expected. He looked at Sal. Where? Martinelli's. Private room. Of course, Dante said, and there was something in his voice, not quite bitterness, but its older, more controlled cousin. He always did like the chicken there. Sal's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and the quality of his stillness shifted in a way that Lena had learned in the course of one morning meant something serious. What? Dante said. Sal looked up. They found Renetti. Where? In the river, Sal said. 3 hours ago. The room was very quiet. Lena understood several things simultaneously. She understood that Renetti, who had walked out of her flower shop alive that morning, was now dead, and that the timeline of that death meant someone had made a decision very quickly. She understood that the meeting Colucci had called and the discovery of Renetti's body were not separate events. And she understood with the clear, cold certainty of someone whose job was reading vital signs that the situation had just become considerably more serious. Colucci took care of Renetti himself, Dante said. He wasn't asking. That's what it looks like, Sal said, which means Renetti wasn't his partner. He was his tool, and a tool that failed gets thrown away. Dante's jaw tightened. He's tidying. He's moving to the end phase. What's the end phase, Lena mishpaced, because she needed to know, and she had established early in this day that she was not someone who waited to be told things she needed to know. Dante looked at her. For the first time, she thought he looked his age, which was older than he looked when he was being powerful and controlled. He looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time. It means one person ends up with the port contracts, he said, and everyone else ends up in the river. The words sat in the room. Outside through the wall, she heard the Greek family at the deli arguing about something cheerful she could tell from the tone, though not the words, and a bus going past and a child somewhere on the block laughing at something. All of it ordinary, all of it belonging to a world that was going to keep moving regardless of what happened in this back room. Then you need to go to that meeting, she said. Both men looked at her. You go, she said to Dante. You present yourself, recovered, controlled, not what he expected after this morning. You take the meeting from him. Whatever he's planned it around you being weakened. So don't be weakened. Sal was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him yet. It was, she thought, something like recalibration. That's not a simple thing, Dante said carefully. I know it's not simple, she said. Simple things don't require strategy. I'm not talking about simple. I'm talking about the approach. She paused. You told me Colucci likes theater, so give him a different play than the one he's rehearsed for. Dante Moretti looked at Lena Kowalska, florist, part-time nurse woman who had been awake since 4:30 in the morning and who had bandaged his shoulder and stared down 3 armed men and negotiated bodyguard terms that included mandatory flower identification, and something moved across his face that was quieter and deeper than anything she had seen there yet. Who taught you to think like this? He said. My grandmother, she said. I told you, she survived the war. He was quiet for a long moment. A week, he said. I said a week. I may be wrong about that. How wrong, she said. He looked at Sal. He looked back at her. This ends at Martinelli's, he said, one way or another. Outside, the bus route ran its loop, and the child on the sidewalk kept laughing, and in the narrow back room of a flower shop on a corner in Carroll Gardens, a woman who had simply been trying to get through a Tuesday was beginning to understand that the line she had crossed that morning was not a line she would ever be able to uncross. And the strange, quiet, and nameable thing she felt about that, about all of it, was not, she realized, entirely fear. That was almost more frightening than anything else. Sal made the call to Colucci's people at 4 in the afternoon, confirming Dante's attendance at the meeting. He used exactly the tone Dante had instructed, neither eager nor reluctant, simply matter-of-fact in the tone of a man who had received an invitation and found it convenient to accept. When he hung up, he said nothing. But the way he set the phone down on the edge of Lena's work table told her the call had gone the way they needed it to. Dante was on his feet by then. She had stopped arguing about that an hour ago because she had identified the specific point at which arguing with him became counterproductive, and standing was not the battle worth fighting. He was upright and he was careful, and the color had come back into his face in a way that Doc Reyes's antibiotics and Lena's insistence on steady hydration had actually earned. He looked from a certain distance like a man who had not been shot that morning. She knew better. She could see the way he held his right arm slightly still, the way his breathing was controlled in the particular manner of someone managing pain through discipline, rather than comfort. You shouldn't go tomorrow, she said. Not for the first time, but this time without the expectation that it would change anything. I know, he said, but you're going. Yes. Then at minimum, she said, you let me redress that wound in the morning before you go anywhere. And you don't wear anything that's going to restrict your shoulder. He looked at her. I wasn't aware you had opinions about my wardrobe. I have opinions about wound management, she said. Your wardrobe is incidental. Marco, who had been standing near the front room doorway since morning and who had spoken approximately 11 words in that entire time, made a sound that might, under generous interpretation, have been a suppressed laugh. Dante looked at him. Marco returned to his previous expression of complete neutrality. It was just past 5 when the second complication arrived. She heard the knock at the back door, the specific knock she had told Tomas to use 3 quick in 1 slow, and she frowned because she had sent Tomas home and hadn't told anyone else about it. She looked at Sal, who had already moved and was standing close to the wall beside the door, and she understood without being told not to open it herself. Who is it? Sal said, not loudly. A pause. Then a woman's voice, older, with an accent that Lena recognized immediately as being from the same part of Brooklyn she had grown up in. My name is Rita Caruso. I live next door. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I saw what happened this morning and I need to talk to Lena. Lena felt the floor shift slightly under her. Rita Caruso was the wife of old Mr. Caruso from the deli, 71 years old, sharp as anything, the woman who had brought Lena soup when she had the flu 2 winters ago and who left fresh bread on the shop step every Sunday morning without ever making anything of it. She looked at Dante. He gave her the smallest possible nod. She opened the door. Rita Caruso was a compact woman with white hair and brown eyes that had not softened at all with age, and she looked at the inside of Lena's back room with the precise, assessing gaze of someone who had grown up knowing exactly what certain kinds of trouble looked like and had made peace with that knowledge a long time ago. She looked at Dante. Something happened in her facial recognition, but tired, complicated. You're Aldo Moretti's son, she said. Dante was very still. You knew my father. Your father bought bread from my husband for 22 years, she said. I knew your mother better. She shifted her eyes back to Lena. 2 men have been sitting in a car across the street since 3 o'clock. They're not police. My husband has been watching them. Everything in the room recalibrated. Sal was at the window in the front room within seconds. Marco was already there. Lena heard Sal's quiet, controlled voice confirming what Rita had said, and she heard the quality of the silence that followed, which was the silence of people doing fast and serious arithmetic. Which car? Dante said to Rita, and his voice had gone back to the thing it did when the situation required it low precise carrying authority, the way a current carries weight. Blue sedan, partial plate, I couldn't get all of it, but the first 3 are 774. Rita said it without hesitation, without drama, the way she might describe a delivery time. Lena stared at her. Mrs. Caruso, she said. Don't look so surprised, Rita said. I've been married to a man in this neighborhood for 50 years. You think I didn't learn to pay attention? She looked back at Dante. They've been there since 3. If they were going to move, they would have moved by now. They're watching, not acting. Colucci's people, Sal said from the doorway, confirming you're here. Confirming you're alive. Dante nodded slowly. He wanted to know if the morning succeeded before he set up the meeting. Now he knows it didn't. So the meeting tomorrow, Lena said. Still happening, Dante said. But now we know he'll come prepared for a version of me that isn't dead. Something shifted in his expression, which is actually better. Colucci improvises badly. If he walks in expecting a wounded man and finds me standing, he'll start adjusting his plan in real time. And that's when he makes mistakes. Rita Caruso looked at Dante with an expression that Lena could not fully interpret. It was not warm exactly, but it was not cold. It was the expression of someone who had been watching a particular kind of man for their entire adult life and had arrived at something past judgment into something more like clear-eyed recognition. Your father would have said the same thing, she said. He was smart too, didn't always help him. The words landed quietly. Dante said nothing, but something moved in his face that Lena had not seen there yet and that she filed away without comment. Rita turned to Lena. Come to dinner tonight, both of you. She held up a hand before either of them could respond. Not a negotiation. You've been in this back room since 6 in the morning. You need to eat a real meal, and my kitchen is attached to the back of the deli and has no windows facing the street. They can't see who's in there. It's the safest room within 50 feet of here right now. Lena looked at Dante. Dante looked at Rita Caruso for a long moment. Then he said, "What time?" 7, she said. "I'm making ossobuco. Don't be late. My husband gets emotional about ossobuco going cold." She left the way she had come without ceremony, and the back door clicked shut behind her, and the room was very quiet for a moment. "She's remarkable," Lena said. "She's from this neighborhood," Dante said, as though that explained it entirely. And perhaps it did. The 2 hours between Rita's visit and 7 o'clock were the strangest hours Lena could remember spending in recent history, which was saying something, given the day she'd had. She processed the delivery invoices that had been sitting on the floor since that morning. She checked on the standing water in the flower buckets and replaced what needed replacing, moving through the front room, while Marco stood near the door and watched her work with the watchful blankness of a man who had been told to stay put and had decided to mean it absolutely. She found herself explaining without fully deciding to what the different flowers were called and what they were used for. And Marco listened without comment, but she noticed that his eyes tracked the information with more attention than his face acknowledged. At 6:30, she went upstairs to her apartment and changed her shirt and washed her face and stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a moment, looking at herself, at the particular quality of tiredness in her eyes and the set of her jaw and the way she looked like herself and also like a version of herself she hadn't been introduced to yet. She went back downstairs. Dante was in the front room, standing near the window, not at it, careful enough not to be visible from outside, but near it. He had put his jacket back on, right arm first, in the careful sequence of someone managing a shoulder, and he looked in the early evening remarkably close to the kind of man she had not expected him to be. "You don't have to come," he said without turning around. He knew she was there by the sound of the stairs. "Rita invited me to dinner," she said. "In my own neighborhood. I'm going. The men in the car can watch me walk next door to my neighbor's kitchen," she said. "People in this neighborhood have been walking next door their entire lives. It would be stranger if I didn't." He turned. In the low light of the shop, with the refrigerated cases casting their faint cool glow over the edges of everything, his face had more shadow and more depth, and she had the specific thought, which she immediately set aside, that he was a very handsome man underneath all of the circumstances. "Lena," he said. "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Don't apologize again," she said. "You've apologized twice already in different ways, and I've accepted it both times. We don't need a third version. What's done is done, and now we deal with what's in front of us. That's the only approach that works." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to say something very similar. She sounds like she was a smart woman." "She was," he said. "She would have liked this shop." Lena looked at the slightly crooked sign and the bundles of dried lavender she kept above the register and the 3 dozen white peonies that had been sitting in their bucket since before any of this morning had happened, still waiting for Carol, who would receive them tomorrow, with no idea what they had witnessed today. "Come on," she said. "Rita doesn't like her ossobuco going cold." The Caruso kitchen was exactly what Lena had said it would be, warm and real, and completely insulated from the particular theater of the street. Old Mr. Caruso, whose first name was actually Enzo, rose from his chair when they came in with the slightly formal courtesy of a man from a different era, and shook Dante's hand with the careful grip of someone assessing another person through their handshake, and whatever he found there made him nod once and say, "Sit down," which in Enzo Caruso's language was the same as saying welcome. They ate. It was, Lena thought, the most surreal and most grounding thing she had done all day, sitting at a kitchen table eating ossobuco with a Mafia boss and a 70-year-old couple from her street. And the conversation that moved around the table was not about pork contracts or rival families or men sitting in blue sedans outside. It was about the neighborhood, about the buildings that had changed and the ones that hadn't, about Dante's mother, who Rita spoke of with the specific fondness of someone who had known a woman before she became someone's widow, about the flower business, which Enzo had opinions about, that were both inaccurate and so enthusiastic that Lena didn't correct him. It was Dante of all of them who was quietest. She watched him across the table, eating carefully, managing his shoulder, listening more than he spoke. But the quality of his listening was different than it was in the back room. Something in him had come down a degree, just one in a way that she suspected very few people ever saw. It was over coffee that Enzo set down his cup and looked at Dante directly and said, "You're going to Martinelli's tomorrow." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Dante said. Enzo was quiet for a moment. "Colucci has been working toward this for 3 years," he said. "Longer, maybe. He wants the port and he wants the political cover that comes with it. The contracts alone aren't enough for him. He wants the relationship." He looked at his coffee cup. "Your father turned him down once, a partnership offer. 1991, that's where this started." Everyone at the table was still. Dante looked at the old man. "I didn't know that." "Your father didn't talk about it," Enzo said. "He said Colucci was the kind of man who made you feel like you were getting an offer when you were actually getting a warning. He turned it down because he said he didn't want to spend the next 30 years watching his back inside his own operation." He picked up his cup. "Smart man." "And what happened after he turned it down?" Dante said carefully. Enzo looked at him. "Your father died in a car accident," he said. 1994. The kitchen was very quiet. Lena looked at Dante. "Sinos." His face had not changed exactly, but the stillness of it had changed. It had gone from the controlled stillness of a capable man managing a difficult situation into something older and more fundamental. The stillness of someone receiving information that reorganizes everything they thought they understood. "That was ruled an accident," Dante said. His voice was level, completely level. "Yes," Enzo said. "It was." Nothing else was said. Nothing else needed to be said. It was Rita who spoke first, practically the way women in kitchens have been speaking, practically through every variety of terrible news for all of human history. "More coffee," she said, and she got up and got it. The walk back to the shop was short, 40 feet no more, and Sal materialized from the darkness near the back door as they approached, and the 2 men in the blue sedan were still there, and none of it had changed in the 2 hours they'd been gone, except that everything had changed. She unlocked the back door, and they went in, and the shop smelled of lavender and wet stems and cool earth exactly the way it always did. And Lena stood in the back room with her jacket still on, and her hands still, and her mind moving very quickly through the new information, the way she processed anything complicated, methodically, one piece at a time. Dante was in the doorway. He had not spoken since Enzo's kitchen. "You knew your father's death wasn't an accident," she said. Not a question. She had read it in the quality of his silence at the table. He looked at her. "I suspected. For a long time. I didn't have a name to put to it. And now you do." "And now I do." She sat down. "This changes the meeting tomorrow." "Yes." "You're not going to negotiate at that table," she said slowly, working it through as she spoke. "You're going to confront him." "No," Dante said. "I'm going to let him believe he's in control of the meeting. And then I'm going to show him that I know, and I'm going to watch what he does when he realizes I know, because what he does in that moment is what tells me exactly how far this goes, how many people, how deep the arrangement is." He paused. "A man who's been building something for 30 years doesn't act alone. There are other people in that room tomorrow who are in his pocket. I need to know which ones before I move." Lena looked at him. At the steadiness of him and the depth of the anger underneath the steadiness and the extraordinary effort it was taking him to keep those two things in their separate compartments. "And if he decides that you knowing is too dangerous," she said, "if he doesn't wait, if he moves during the meeting." Dante was quiet. "Dante," she said. "It's a risk," he said. "It's your life," she said. "Yes," he said simply. "It is." She stood up. She walked to where he was standing in the doorway, and she looked at him at close range the way she looked at patients when she needed them to understand that she was saying something that mattered, and that the usual defenses people put up around things that mattered were not going to be useful right now. "Then you go in with something he doesn't know you have," she said. "You go in with the fact that you already know it isn't just about the port contracts, that this is about your father. And you go in with a way out of the room if the situation changes, not a plan for confrontation, a plan for exit." He was looking at her with that expression again, the one she had seen the first time when she had told him that fear was a feeling and not a decision, the one she didn't quite have a word for yet. "You've been thinking about this since the kitchen," he said. "I've been thinking about this since you said one way or another," she said. "That's a phrase that means you've already considered the possibility that you don't walk out of that room." The muscle in his jaw moved. "You're not allowed to do that," she said. "Not because of me specifically, but because the people in this neighborhood read Enzo Mr. Petrakis with his pretzel breakfast and his swollen ankles. They exist in a world where what happens to you has consequences for them that they didn't choose and can't control. And that matters. Whether you've thought about it that way before or not, it matters." When the silence between them was different from any of the silences that had come before it during this very long day. It had a weight and a texture and a quality that she was aware of in a way she wasn't going to examine directly right now, because there was too much else to deal with and because some things deserved more than the end of a long and genuinely terrible day. "I'll have Sal work on an exit option," Dante said finally. "Good," she said. "And you," he said, "tomorrow while I'm at Martinelli's." "I'll be here," she said, "with Marco." "With Marco," she agreed, who now knows the difference between Alstroemeria and lilies. He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and then he looked away toward the front of the shop, toward the refrigerated cases and the slightly crooked sign, and the world on the other side of the glass that had been going about its business all day without any idea what was happening inside. "Thank you," he said, "for today. All of it." "You've thanked me," she said. "Same rule as the apologies. We don't need a third version." He made a sound then short, quiet, surprised out of him that she was fairly certain it was the closest thing to a laugh she was going to hear from Dante Moretti tonight. And she filed that away too, in the same place she was keeping the other things she wasn't going to examine directly yet. And she said goodnight, and she went upstairs to her apartment, and she sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time before she slept. Downstairs, she could hear the quiet movements of Marco doing his rounds of the shop. She could hear Sal's voice very faint through the floor, making calls, managing the pieces of a situation that was moving towards something none of them could fully see yet. And underneath all of it, the specific nighttime silence of her neighborhood, the sounds she had fallen asleep to for 11 years that had always meant the same thing and now meant something entirely different. She did not know, lying there in the dark, whether tomorrow the world would look like something she recognized. She did not know whether Dante Moretti would walk out of a room in Martinelli's restaurant on his own feet. She did not know what Enzo Caruso's quiet words at a kitchen table were going to set in motion, or how far the thing that had started in 1991 had actually traveled, or how many people had known and said nothing. What she knew was that in the morning she would redress a wound and she would watch a man walk out of her shop towards something dangerous, and she would stay here with Marco among the flowers and the invoices and the refrigerated cases, and she would wait. And waiting she had found over the course of an entire career of sitting with people in frightening moments was its own kind of courage. It just didn't feel like it while you were doing it. She closed her eyes. Outside, the blue sedan was still there, and in the private room of a restaurant she had never been to, a man named Colucci was planning something that had been 30 years in the making, and tomorrow all of it was going to move at once. She was awake before the alarm. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that she lay still for a full minute before getting up, which she almost never did because she was listening. Not to anything specific, just to the quality of the morning, whether it held the same low pressure she had felt yesterday or something different. Something worse. It was different. She couldn't name it. She got up anyway. Dante was already awake when she came downstairs. She could tell from the sound of his voice, before she reached the back room, low measured talking to Sal in the particular tone that meant decisions were being made and confirmed, not discussed. She knocked twice on the door frame before entering, which was something she had started doing without thinking about it, some instinct about the boundaries of a situation like this. And Dante looked up when she came in with the expression of a man who had not slept much and had decided not to let that be anyone else's problem. "How long have you been up?" she said. "A while," he said. She set down the 2 mugs she'd carried from upstairs and looked at him with the clinical directness she used when she wasn't going to negotiate about something. 4 hours of sleep after blood loss is not adequate." 3, he said. "And I know." She handed him the coffee without comment because there was nothing useful left to say about it and sat down across from him on her stool. The morning outside was gray and cold, the particular cold of late winter in Brooklyn that had no drama to it, just a flat, persistent chill that got into things. She could hear Marco in the front room already moving, already doing his quiet circuit of the shop. "I'm going to redress the wound before you leave," she said. "That's not optional." "I know," he said. "And you're going to tell me exactly what time the meeting starts, and I want a name, a specific name, not just Sal, of someone I can call if I don't hear from you by a specific time." He looked at her over the edge of the mug. "You've been planning this." "I was awake early," she said. "I had time." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but its underlying intention. "There's a man named Vincent," he said. "He'll be outside Martinelli's during the meeting. I'll give you his number. If you call it and say that Rita sends her regards, he'll know it's from you and he'll respond accordingly." "And what does responding accordingly mean?" "It means he'll tell you what he knows," Dante said, "which at that point will be more than what you know." She nodded. She reached for her medical kit and he turned slightly on the work table without being asked, making the wound accessible, and she began carefully removing the previous night's dressing. The wound looked as good as she could have expected, no spreading redness, no heat beyond the normal response, the edges holding cleanly. She worked in silence for a moment, focused. "Enzo's information," she said without looking up from what she was doing. "About your father, are you going to be able to sit across from Colucci and not let him see it?" "Yes," he said. "That's a fast answer." "I've been managing what Colucci can and cannot see for 3 years," he said. "One more day is not the difficult part." She pressed the clean dressing carefully into place and began taping it. "The difficult part is after." "Yes," he said, in his own. "The difficult part is after." She finished and sat back. He turned to face her and she looked at him directly for a moment, at the control surface of him and the depth of what was moving underneath it and the extraordinary discipline it took to keep those two things separated. "If it goes wrong in there," she said, "Lena, I'm not asking you to promise me it won't," she said. "I'm not that naive. I'm asking you what the protocol is, what Sal does, what Marco does, what I do." He was quiet for a moment and she could see him deciding something, not whether to tell her, she thought, but how much to tell her, which was a different calculation. "If I'm not out of that building within 20 minutes of the meeting's scheduled end time," he said, "Sal moves. He has people positioned. It will not be quiet and it will not be clean, but it will be fast." He paused. "You and Marco leave this location immediately. Not upstairs out, Rita's kitchen or further. You do not come back here until Sal calls you directly on your phone and uses my name." "Uses your name how?" she said. "He'll say Dante says the peonies are ready," he said, "because it's specific enough that you'll know it's real and general enough that it means nothing to anyone else." She stared at him. "You thought about this last night," she said. "I think about contingencies," he said. "It's how I've survived this long." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing it, the specificity of it, the care of it, the fact that in whatever time he'd had between Enzo's kitchen and this gray morning, he had built an exit plan that included her. That had her name in it. "Dante says the peonies are ready," she repeated. "Yes." "All right," she said. She stood and began packing her kit. "Then let's get you ready to go convince a murderer that you don't know he's one." Sal arrived at the back door at 8 sharp with 2 other men Lena hadn't seen before. Younger, careful, wearing the bland expressions of people trained to be unreadable. They spoke briefly with Dante in Italian, and Lena moved to the front room to give them space and stood near the refrigerated cases and looked at her flowers without seeing them. Marco appeared beside him. He had his jacket on, which meant he was going to stay when the others left, and she was surprised to find that was something close to a comfort. "The Alstro Emeria," he said quietly and nodded toward the case. She looked at him. "They look like small lilies," he said, "but the leaves grow differently, alternate, twisted at the base." She looked at the case. He was right. She looked back at him. "You actually paid attention," she said. "I always pay attention," he said. "I just don't always talk." She nodded. That was, she thought, exactly what she had understood about him from the beginning. "Good," she said, and meant it in more than one sense. At 8:40, Dante came through to the front room. He had his jacket on, the movement precise and practiced in the way she had already learned to read, the pain being managed rather than absent. He was wearing the clothes Sal had brought, not the ruined shirt from yesterday, but something clean, dark, well cut. He looked like the version of himself that the world was supposed to see. He stopped in front of her. "Don't open the shop today," he said. "Tell anyone who asks that you're doing inventory." "I have an order for Mrs. Petrakis." "Tomas," he said. She paused. "Fine, Tomas." He looked at her. The front of the shop was quiet and the morning was gray outside, and Marco was standing at a respectful distance and Sal was already at the door. "I'll be back by 2, Dante said. "I know," she said. "Vincent, Rita sends her regards. Dante says the peonies are ready. I have it." He looked at her for one moment longer. "You are the most organized person I have met in 20 years, he said, "and I know a great number of organized people." "Go," she said, "and come back." He went. The door closed. She heard the cars outside, 2 of them, she thought, from the sound. And then the sound moved away and the shop was very quiet and Marco was standing near the window watching the street, and she was alone with the flowers in the gray morning and the particular quality of waiting that she had described to herself last night in the dark as its own kind of courage. She was testing that theory now. She called Tomas and arranged the Petrakis delivery without mentioning anything unusual, and Tomas, to his credit, asked no questions and said he'd be there by 9:30, and she was grateful for that, for the ordinary professionalism of a 22-year-old who had been raised right. At 9, she made fresh coffee. At 9:15, she began a supply order she'd been putting off for 2 weeks. She was doing the work her hands knew how to do without requiring her full attention, which was what she needed right now. Her attention was elsewhere, doing its own kind of surveillance on a restaurant across Brooklyn she had never been to. At 9:52, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. She looked at Marco, who looked at the phone and nodded once. She answered. "Ms. Kowalska," a voice she didn't know, male, middle-aged, very calm in the way that calm can be its own form of pressure. "My name is not important. What's important is that you have something I need." Her hand tightened on the phone. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The man you patched up yesterday morning," the voice said. "He told you things. He always talks to the person who fixes him up. It's a weakness he doesn't know he has. I need to know what he said." She was very still. Her eyes went to Marco. He had moved closer, silently reading her face. "I'm a florist," she said. "I don't know who you're calling for." "You're a florist and a nurse," the voice said pleasantly. "You've been running Kowalska's Blooms for 11 years. Your elderly patient is named Petrakis, and your delivery driver is named Tomas, and your neighbor Rita Caruso brought you soup when you had the flu in February of 2 years ago. I know quite a lot about you, Ms. Kowalska. That's not a threat. It's an introduction." The ground shifted under her, not physically, but the space of the conversation had just changed its shape entirely, and she felt it the way she felt changes in a patient's breathing. Before she understood it analytically, her body already knew. This was Colucci, not a representative, not someone he'd sent. The quality of the knowledge was too specific, too curated. This was a man who prepared his own information personally, who did not trust anyone else to know what he knew. Enzo had said it. Colucci built theater, and this was him setting the stage. "You're at Martinelli's," she said. "The meeting started 20 minutes ago." A pause, small but real. "You're quick," he said. "You called me during the meeting," she said, "which means you're not in the room, which means you're either very confident it's going well or you're covering something else while it happens." Another pause. Longer this time. "What did he tell you?" Colucci said. The pleasantness was still there, but the texture under it had changed. She made a decision in the space of one breath. "He told me about the port contracts," she said. "He told me about the 3 families and the negotiation. And that you called the meeting," she said. "That's all." "That's all," Colucci repeated. He didn't believe her. She could hear it in the evenness of the repetition, the way people repeat things they are testing for the hollow sound of a lie. "I'm a florist," she said again. "I bandaged a wound, and I fed someone coffee. I'm not in this." "You're already in this, Ms. Kowalska," he said. "You became in this when you pulled him off the street. The question is which side of it you'd like to be on." She said nothing. She had learned over a long career of difficult conversations in difficult rooms that silence was not agreement and that people who needed to fill silence would always fill it with more than they intended to. I'm a reasonable man, Colucci said. I'm not interested in harming people who aren't in the game, but I need to know what he told you, specifically. And in exchange for that, you go back to your flowers and your elderly patients and nobody knows your name. And if I don't, she said, then you stay in the game, he said. And the game is not kind to people who don't know the rules. Marco was watching her with an intensity that made the air tight. She held up one finger 1 minute and he stilled. Give me 24 hours, she said. I need to think. You have until this afternoon, he said. I'll call again at 3. The line went dead. She set the phone down on the register counter and looked at it for a moment and then looked at Marco. Get Sal, she said. Now. Marco already had his phone out. Sal called back in 4 minutes, which felt like 40. She told him everything, the voice, the questions, the timeline, the offer in the compressed, sequential way. She reported patient information, leaving nothing out and adding nothing that wasn't there. Sal was quiet for 3 seconds when she finished. Then, he's not in the room. That's what I said. He left before the meeting started, Sal said, and she could hear him thinking in real time, the rapid, quiet processing of someone doing very fast math. He set it up for the others to walk into. The meeting isn't a negotiation, it's a distraction, she said. He's using it to keep everyone in one room while he does something else. I have to reach Dante, Sal said. Can you get a message in? I have a man at the bar, Sal said. It'll take 3 minutes. Go, she said. I'll stay on the line. She heard the shift in his movement, the quality of background sound changing, and she stood in her shop with the phone pressed to her ear and Marco standing 3 feet away watching the street and her heart doing something loud and steady in her chest that she was consciously not paying attention to. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. She counted, then Sal's voice tight in a way she had not heard it before. He's not there. She went cold. What? Dante, he's not in the private room. He arrived, he was shown in, and then Sal's breath was controlled, but only just. My man says he excused himself 10 minutes into the meeting, said he needed to take a call. He hasn't come back. The pieces assembled themselves in her mind with a speed that surprised her and then didn't because she had been building toward this understanding since yesterday afternoon, and her brain had simply been waiting for the last piece. Colucci didn't want the meeting to catch Dante unprepared, she said. He wanted the meeting to pull Dante away from his people, into the open. Somewhere between the table and wherever Dante thought he was going to make his call. Sal said something she didn't follow in Italian under his breath. Where is Vincent? She said. Outside, front entrance. A pause. He's not answering. The cold in her chest spread. Back entrance, she said. Is there someone at the back? There was, Sal said, was. She set the phone down without saying goodbye and looked at Marco, and Marco was already moving. Stay here, he said, and his voice had changed completely. It was flat and hard and carried an authority she hadn't heard from him before. No, she said. Miss Kowalska, Marco, she said. He's somewhere between that restaurant and wherever Colucci's people took him, which means he's close because they couldn't have moved him far in 10 minutes without someone seeing something. And I know this area better than any of your people because I have been walking these blocks for 11 years. She already had her jacket off the hook. So you can stand here and tell me to stay, or you can take me with you and use what I know. But I'm going in either way. Marco looked at her for one of those long seconds that contain a great deal. Then he took out his phone and made a call, spoke 3 words she didn't understand and said to her, "Don't fall behind." They went out the back. The next 12 minutes were the most disorienting of her life, and Lena Kowalska had had disorienting minutes. They moved fast, not running, which drew attention, but the kind of purposeful, rapid walking that in New York City was indistinguishable from urgency. Marco was on the phone the entire time, speaking in short bursts, and she was navigating left here because this alley connects behind the dry cleaner, right here because this block has loading docks with sight lines to 2 streets. She knew it the way you know the inside of a building you've lived in for a decade without thinking, without consulting anything. It was the loading dock behind a wholesale grocery 2 blocks from Martinelli's where she heard it. Not a gunshot. She had heard enough of those yesterday to know this wasn't that. It was voices, one raised, one very controlled, and the control of the second was the specific control of someone managing serious pain and refusing to show it. She knew that sound. She had heard it in hospitals and in back rooms, and that morning in her own shop. She grabbed Marco's arm. He stopped. She pointed. He looked at her. She held his gaze and nodded once, completely certain. He moved first and she was 3 steps behind him, and what happened in the next 90 seconds was something she would reconstruct afterward from its pieces, because she did not experience it as a sequence during the moment itself. She experienced it as a series of absolute imperatives, one after another, each one replacing the previous one, with a complete focus that made nursing in a crisis different from nursing in normal conditions. Dante was on his feet, which was the first thing she registered. Against the wall, upright, she had been afraid of the alternative, with his right shoulder against it, in a way that told her the wound had been compromised and the pain was significant. 2 men she didn't recognize. Marco dealing with both of them in a way she did not look at directly. And Colucci. She had not expected to recognize him. She had no reason to. But the man standing 4 feet from Dante, with the quality of stillness that belonged only to people who were absolutely certain they were in control, was obviously, completely, undeniably the architect of everything that had happened since yesterday morning, and something in her that she had kept very calm for the last 36 hours stopped being calm. She walked forward. "Hey," she said. Her voice was completely steady, which was the thing she would think about later. "Step back." Colucci looked at her. He was in his 60s, well-dressed, with the groomed, intended appearance of a man who had never let the world see him disordered. He looked at her with genuine surprise, which told her he didn't know who she was. In his world, apparently, women in green jackets who walked toward him saying "step back" did not exist as a category. "Who are you?" he said. "I'm his nurse," she said, "and if you've reopened that wound, I am going to be very unhappy with you." Dante from the wall made a sound. It was low and it was brief, and she was almost entirely certain, a suppressed laugh. Colucci stared at her. He was recalibrating. She could see it happening, and she used the 3 seconds it took him to do it to get between him and Dante, which put her between Colucci's right hand and the man she was standing next to, and she was aware of what that meant, and she had decided it consciously with full information before she moved. "The men you had outside Martinelli's," she said to Colucci, standing very still, "are being handled by people who are much better at this than me. And the call you made to my shop this morning, telling me you know about Tomas and Mr. Petrakis and Rita Caruso's soup, that call is on record." She said it with the complete assurance of someone telling the truth, which she was not entirely, but she had learned from a very good teacher in the last 36 hours that the truth of a thing and the certainty of how you said it were not always the same thing. So what you need to decide right now is whether this ends here, which is messy and visible, and in a loading dock 2 blocks from a restaurant where you just hosted a meeting with witnesses, or whether it ends some other way that costs you considerably less. Colucci looked at her. He looked at Dante, and she saw it, the thing Enzo Caruso had described, the thing that had taken 30 years to build. She saw it encountering something it had not planned for. Something outside its model, something that had no category in its architecture. A florist from Carroll Gardens standing in a loading dock with her arms slightly out from her sides, blocking a shot that may or may not have been coming, with the absolute bone-level steadiness of a woman who had been dealing with frightening situations for her entire adult life and had simply decided that this one was not going to be different. Colucci took 1 step back. It was not surrender. She knew that. He was calculating, reassessing, doing the arithmetic of exposure and witness and the new variables she had introduced by simply being there. But it was 1 step back, and in that 1 step was the entire shape of what happened next. Marco was behind him now, and Sal's voice came through Marco's earpiece loud enough for her to catch the word clear. And Colucci looked between all of them with the expression of a man who had built 30 years of theater and was watching the set fall down around him in a loading dock in Brooklyn on a gray February morning. "This isn't finished," he said. "It will be," Dante said. His voice from behind her had recovered everything in the authority, the depth, the particular quality that changed the weight of a room when it entered. "It will be by tonight." Colucci left, not running, walking with the precise control of a man who was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of watching him hurry. She watched him go, and she did not breathe fully until he had turned the corner. Then she turned around and looked at Dante. He was still against the wall. His face had the color of old concrete again, which told her the wound had taken damage, and his right hand was pressed flat against his shoulder. But his eyes were clear and sharp and fixed on her with an expression she had no category for at all. "You walked in front of me," he said. "Yes," she said. She was already moving toward him, already assessing. "Move your hand." "Let me see." "Lena," he said. "Move your hand," she said. "You walked in front of me," he said again, and this time it was different. Not an observation, but something underneath an observation, something that had no practiced quality to it at all, that had come out of him without the usual architecture of control around it. She looked at him, not as a patient, just at him. "I know," she said quietly. "I know I did." His jaw moved. His eyes did something she was not going to look away from, because it was the most honest thing she had seen in 36 hours of honest things, and it deserved to be seen. "Why?" he said. She held his gaze for one moment. Then she said, "Move your hand. We can talk about why later. Right now, I need to see the wound." He moved his hand. She went to work there in the loading dock, in the gray morning cold, with Marco standing watch and Sal's voice crackling through an earpiece somewhere behind her, and her hands did what her hands had always known how to do, which was hold things together while everything else was still falling. Marco got them into a car 2 minutes after Colucci turned the corner. Not Sal's car, a different one, a plain dark sedan that had been idling half a block away, driven by a man who said nothing and asked nothing and pulled into traffic with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this kind of retrieval before. Lena sat in the back beside Dante with her jacket pressed against his shoulder and her eyes on the wound and her mind running the clinical arithmetic she always ran in motion. Blood loss rate, pressure, adequacy, time to a sterile environment, probability of secondary infection, given that the original repair had now been stressed twice in under 24 hours. Dante was watching the back of the driver's seat. His breathing was controlled. His jaw was set. He had not spoken since the loading dock. "The tape held, but the lower edge lifted," she said without looking up from the wound. "You didn't tear anything new. The bleeding is surface level from the movement. That's the good news." "And the bad news," he said. "The bad news is that you are going to spend the next 8 hours being actually still for once," she said. "Not 3 hours of sleep still, not sitting upright and making calls still, horizontal, completely. Or I will find a way to sedate you that does not require your cooperation." From the front seat, the driver made a sound. "Eyes on the road," Marco said. "They are on the road," the driver said. He was smiling. She could hear it. Dante looked at her sideways. "You don't have sedatives." "I have a flower shop and a medical kit and 11 years of improvisation," she said. "Don't test me." He was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly, so that only she could hear it, "You walked in front of me." "I know I did." She said the same answer she had given him in the loading dock because it was still the only true answer. She kept her hands steady on the compress and her eyes on what they were doing. "We said we'd talk about it later." "It's later," he said. She looked up then. He was looking at her with the expression that had no architecture around it, the one she had seen in the loading dock, the one that had come out of him without the usual layers of control. In the daylight of the car, it was even more specific than it had been. It was not gratitude, though gratitude was part of it. It was not the professional assessment he had turned on everything else. It was something that had no practice quality at all. Something that looked from this distance like a man who had been alone in a very particular way for a very long time and had just had that fact pointed out to him by someone standing in a loading dock with their arms slightly out from their sides. "I walked in front of you," she said, "because you were hurt and I was not, and because Colucci expected everything in that moment except someone he couldn't categorize. And because," she paused, "she had decided somewhere between the loading dock and this car that she was done managing what she said the way she managed everything else, with the practical nurse's caution about what the patient needed to hear versus what was actually true. Because somewhere between yesterday morning and this morning, you stopped being a patient and became something I don't have a clinical word for. And I wasn't going to stand behind that and watch." He was very still. "That's an honest answer," he said. "I don't have another kind," she said. The car stopped. They were back in Carroll Gardens at the rear of her street, and Sal was already outside waiting. When Marco opened the door and the morning had moved past 10 o'clock, and none of the things that needed to happen before tonight had happened yet. She got Dante up the 11 steps to her apartment, which he had never been in, and which she saw for a moment through his eyes, small tidy with the same quality of deliberate and unpretentious care as the shop below it, the kind of space that had been made comfortable by one person over a long time, and that did not perform for anyone. She put him on the couch rather than the work table because he had earned the couch, and she redressed the wound properly with everything she needed and no improvisation required, and she was efficient and focused, and she did not look at his face until she was done. When she did, he was asleep. She stood there for a moment looking at him, at the quality of sleep on a face that had not been this unguarded in all the time she had known him, which was less than 2 days and which felt in every way longer than that. Then she went to the kitchen and made herself tea and sat at her small table and thought. Sal knocked on the apartment door at 11:15. He came in with the kind of careful step of a man entering a space and immediately calibrating his volume to it, and he sat across from her at the table and put his phone face down and looked at her for a moment with those steady, measured eyes. "How is he?" Sal said. "He'll be all right if he stays down," she said. "He won't stay down." "No," Sal agreed. She wrapped her hands around her mug. "What happens now?" she said. "With Colucci." Sal was quiet for a moment. "Colucci made a move this morning that exposed a number of things he had managed to keep unexposed for 3 years," he said. "The people at the table in Martinelli's private room, 2 of them are going to have very difficult conversations with Dante before tonight. One of them has already called to begin that conversation. Which means they're more afraid of being on Colucci's side now than Dante's," she said. "Yes," Sal said. "That's how these things shift. They don't shift on principle. They shift on arithmetic." She thought about Enzo at the kitchen table, 1994, the word accident delivered with everything that wasn't in the word. And Enzo's information about Dante's father. Sal's face did something complicated. "Dante will deal with that in his own time," he said. "It's not the first piece of information that has moved him, and it won't be the last. What matters today is that Colucci used this morning, and it failed. And when a man like that uses his best move, and it fails, the structure around him starts to understand that and starts to make its own decisions." He paused. "He will try again, but he will try from a smaller position than he was in yesterday." "That's not the same as finished," she said. "No," Sal said. "Finished takes longer." He looked at her steadily. "Ms. Kowalska, Lena, I want to tell you something, and I need you to understand it is not a formality." She looked at him. "In 22 years, Sal said, I have watched Dante Moretti operate in situations that would have ended most people. I have watched him make decisions under conditions that would have broken other men. I have never not once watched him sleep in someone's home." He let that sit. "I don't know what to do with that information entirely, but I wanted you to have it." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Sal," she said. He nodded, stood, picked up his phone. "I'll be downstairs. Don't open the shop today." "Tomas is handling deliveries," she said. "Good kid," Sal said. He had, she realized, probably run a full background check on Tomas within 30 minutes of yesterday morning. She found she didn't mind. He left. She drank her tea. She listened to the apartment, to the quality of its quiet, which had a person in it now in a way it usually didn't. Dante woke at 12:40. She heard the change in his breathing from where she was sitting with her supply invoice and her laptop, and she looked up and found him awake and looking at the ceiling with the particular focus of someone who had been running through something in his mind before he was fully conscious. "Stay there," she said. "I've been asleep for 2 hours," he said. "I know. You need 4 more. Lena." "Dante," she said with exactly the same tone, and he looked at her and then back at the ceiling, and she heard the specific exhale of a man choosing his battles. "Colucci will move again today," he said. "Sal said the arithmetic is shifting," she said. A pause. "You talked to Sal. He came up at 11. He told me that 2 of the men from the table have already called you, and that Colucci is operating from a smaller position than yesterday." She returned to her invoice. "He also told me you don't sleep in people's homes." Silence. "He shouldn't have told you that," Dante said. "Probably not," she said. "Are you hungry?" Another silence different in quality. Yes, he said. She made eggs because she had eggs, and because it was the kind of food that didn't require decisions. And she brought them to the coffee table and sat in the chair across from him while he sat up carefully and ate with the focused attention of someone whose body was reminding them urgently of everything it needed. She ate too. The apartment was quiet. Outside, she could hear the neighborhood, the Greek family's delivery, someone's radio 2 floors above the ordinary texture of a Brooklyn Wednesday moving through its business. "Tell me about this shop," he said. "How you ended up here?" She looked at him. "You want the real version or the short version?" "I've been in your home for 3 hours," he said. "Real version." She told him. Her grandmother emigrating after the war with a husband who died 2 years later and a daughter who was 6 months old, and a skill with flowers that had been, as her grandmother put it, the one thing no one could take from her. Her mother inheriting both the shop and the stubbornness and running it until her hands gave out. Lena doing nursing school because she had wanted to be useful in a way that was portable in case the shop ever stopped being enough, and then discovering that the shop was always enough and the nursing was also always enough, and that some people are simply made for two things at once. The marriage, he said, because she had mentioned it and then moved past it. 7 years, she said. He was a good man who wanted a different kind of life than I was willing to have. Quieter, smaller. He wanted to move to Connecticut. She paused. I couldn't leave the shop. Or rather, I could have. But I would have been leaving something of myself that I wasn't willing to leave. You chose the shop, he said. I chose this, she said, meaning more than the shop, and he understood that from the way he nodded. I never married, he said. There were attempts in the earlier years. Women who understood what the life meant, and women who didn't, and women who understood it and left anyway, which was the only version I respected. He set down the plate. After my father died, I think I understood that anyone I brought close became a liability. So I stopped bringing people close. That's a long time to live that way, she said. 30 years, he said. Yes. He said it without self-pity, which was what made it land the way it did. Her phone rang. She looked at it. Unknown number. She looked at Dante. He sat up fully, the movement sharp with pain he didn't acknowledge, and held out his hand. She gave him the phone. He answered. She watched his face during the 30 seconds that followed, the absolute stillness of it, the quality of listening that took in everything and showed nothing. When he lowered the phone, his expression had not changed at all, which told her it was significant. That was one of the men from the table this morning, he said at Greco. He says Colucci left the city an hour ago. She stared. Left. Airport, Dante said. Private terminal. The room adjusted around that information. She could feel herself recalibrating the way the shape of a situation changes when a central piece moves unexpectedly. He ran, she said. He assessed the field and decided it had turned against him, Dante said. Which means someone at that table today said something to him after the meeting ended that told him the arithmetic had shifted further than he expected. He looked at her. Sal moved faster than I thought. Should you call him? He'll call me, Dante said. And 30 seconds later, he did. She went to the kitchen to give him privacy and stood at the sink the way she had been standing at sinks throughout this entire situation, hands wrapped around something, eyes on the middle distance, her mind doing its own parallel processing. She heard the cadence of the call without the words, and she heard the moment it ended, and she heard the specific quality of the silence that followed. She came back in. Dante was sitting with the phone in his hands and an expression on his face that she had not seen before, which was something like the expression of a man setting down something heavy. Not relief exactly. More like the moment after relief when the muscles that have been holding start to remember what loose feels like. It's done, he said. She sat down. Tell me. Colucci had a working arrangement with 2 Port Authority officials going back to 1997, he said. Sal has been collecting documentation for 8 months. He moved it this morning to put it in front of the right people at the right moment. Colucci got a call 20 minutes after the meeting ended from someone he trusted who told him it was over. He paused. He left because the alternative was being handled here, which would have been less comfortable. And the officials, she said, will have their own conversations with people who handle those things, he said. That's not my department. And your father, she said. The word landed in the room with weight. He looked at her. The expression shifted back to something that was not the stripped, unguarded thing she had seen in the loading dock, but not the full practiced architecture either. Something in between which she understood was where he actually lived in the space between what he showed the world and what he kept entirely to himself. My father's name will be part of what Sal's documentation establishes, he said. What happened in '94 will be, he stopped. It won't be ignored. That's not the same as justice, she said. No, he said, but in this world it is the version of justice that exists, and I have known that for a long time. He looked at his hands. What I didn't have was the name. Now I do, Tom. She was quiet. She understood in a way that required no further explanation that having the name was its own kind of something, not resolution, not peace, but the specific and necessary thing that allows a person to stop carrying an open question. She had seen it in patients and families sitting in hospital rooms, in the people who wanted to know exactly what the diagnosis was, even when the diagnosis was hard. The not knowing cost more than the knowing, always. I'm sorry, she said, about your father. He looked at her. You keep apologizing for things that aren't yours, he said. It's not an apology, she said. It's just, I'm sorry that you carried it for 30 years, that no one told you. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the light had shifted into the particular clear quality of late winter afternoon, the kind that had no warmth but had a brightness that was almost generous. She could hear Marco downstairs moving through the shop. She could smell faintly the wet stems from the open refrigerator case 11 steps below. I need to ask you something, Dante said. All right, she said. What happens now, he said, for you, with all of this? She looked at him steadily. Say what you mean. I mean, he said that 2 days ago you were a florist and a part-time nurse in Carroll Gardens, and your biggest problem was a patient who eats pretzels for breakfast. And now you have walked in front of me in a loading dock and fed me eggs in your apartment and know more about the interior of my situation than most people who have worked for me for a decade. He held her gaze. I need to know what you want that to mean. Because what I want it to mean is not, I can't be neutral about what I want it to mean. And I am not a man who operates without being honest about his own position. She took a breath. What do you want it to mean? She said. He looked at her in that way he had the one that was past the architecture, and he said, I want it to mean that I come back. To the shop, she said. To you, he said, simply, completely. She was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about the 11 years of this apartment and the 11 steps to the shop and the slightly crooked sign and the Tuesday tulip special and the peonies that had been sitting in their bucket since before any of this existed. She was thinking about what Sal had said at the table. I have never watched him sleep in someone's home. She was thinking about what she had told him in the car somewhere between yesterday morning and this morning. You stopped being a patient and became something I don't have a clinical word for. My life is this, she said. The shop, the patients, this neighborhood. I'm not going to become something else. If you come back to this. I know, he said. And whatever comes with you, she said carefully, whatever is still unresolved, whatever the version of this world looks like after Colucci, that has to be honest. With me. All of it. Yes, he said. I don't do things by half, she said. I never have. Not the shop, not the nursing, not the marriage when I was in it. She held his gaze. So if this is what you mean, you have to mean all of it. Because I will not be managed. I will not be kept at a comfortable distance for my own protection. I've spent 2 days making my own decisions about my own risk, and I'm not going to stop. He looked at her for a long moment, and in the look was something that had accumulated since yesterday morning. The back room, the work table, the dinner at Rita's, the loading dock, this apartment, this conversation, all of it layered into a single sustained and serious thing. I know who you are, he said. I knew it when you told me fear was a feeling and not a decision. I am not here asking you to be something smaller. She nodded, once, firmly. Then yes, she said, come back. It was Sal who called at 4:30, and he used his own name and said it plainly. The situation is resolved, it's clear, and I'm sorry about the code phrase because it became unnecessary, and she knew from the ordinariness of it that the code phrase would have been for a different version of this day, the version she had been quietly prepared for since yesterday morning, and she was glad, with a depth of gladness that ran entirely below the practical surface of her, that it was this version instead. Dante left at 5. He had to. There were people he needed to see, things that needed to be handled before the night made them harder. He stood at the back door of the shop in the early dark. Sal's car idling in the alley, and she stood on the step and looked at him. He looked at the sign above the front door, the slightly crooked one. She had mentioned it, that she had refused every suggestion to replace it, and he had said nothing about it at the time, but he looked at it now with an expression she could read. "My mother's handwriting," she said. He nodded. "Go," she said. "Handle what needs handling." He looked at her. 3 days, he said. "I'll be back in 3 days." "I'll have Carol's peonies ready," she said. "She comes on Fridays." And something moved across his face, then quick, unguarded, the realest thing she had seen, and he said nothing because it was one of those moments that did not require words, and he turned and got in the car, and she watched the car until the alley was empty. She stood there for one more moment in the cold, her hands in her pockets, looking at the back of her street, at the lights in Rita's kitchen next door, and the sound of Enzo's radio, and the whole ordinary, undestroyable texture of a neighborhood that had been here before her and would be here after that, had survived things and absorbed things and continued things with the specific stubbornness of places that are made of people rather than buildings. Then she went inside. She reopened the refrigerated case and checked the water levels in every bucket, and wrote the Thursday arrangement for the restaurant on Smith Street, and pulled the invoice for the Tuesday tulip special, and set Carol's peonies in fresh water at the front of the case, where they would be the first thing anyone saw when they walked through the door. Marco came to say goodbye at 6. He stood in the doorway of the back room in his jacket and said, with the particular economy of a man who had decided something was worth saying, "You did good work, yesterday and today." "So did you," she said. "The Alstroemeria." He almost smiled. "Alternate leaves," he said. "Twisted at the base." "Twisted at the base," she confirmed. He left. She was alone in the shop, which was what she was every evening on this hour, alone among the flowers, the close of a working day, the refrigerator, humming the city, running its loop outside the sign above the door in her mother's handwriting, slightly crooked and completely unmoving and entirely right. She had been standing in this specific aloneness for 11 years, and it had always been enough, and it was still enough, and what had happened in the last 2 days had not emptied it of that. It had added to it, changed the shape of it, given it a dimension she had not known it was missing, until she stood in a loading dock with her arms slightly out from her sides and understood completely that the life she had built was worth stepping in front of something for. She locked the front door. She turned off the light in the back room. She went to the sink and washed her hands, cold water on her wrists, the way she always did at the end of things, and she stood there for a moment in the dark of her own shop, and she felt something settle in her, the way things settle when they have found their right position after a long time of being slightly off. 3 days. She could work with 3 days. She went upstairs and she left the peonies ready.